A professor once told me, we teach you all of the rules so that you know how to break them properly. And in the world of Dungeons & Dragons, most of the rules can be bent and some can be broken, depending on the playstyle you're looking for at your table.
Now, the rules of Dungeons & Dragons are part of what makes it a game, as opposed to just an exercise in improvised collaborative storytelling. But the rules can be hacked, changed, or modified by us and our playgroups to play the game that we want to play and to tell the stories that we're most interested in. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel, where we discuss everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for DMs and guides for players.
We upload new videos every Thursday, so please subscribe so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are taking a look at 5 very simple house rules that you can apply at your game for better combat.
These rules are ones that we've implemented in our own games. They don't break the gameplay or disrupt the table too much. They're just there to make more tactical fun during combat at your table.
They're easy to remember, and they have some great outcomes that yield better tactical combat, more exciting, dramatic moments in play, make things a little bit more convenient for the players, and make a few things more manageable for the Dungeon Master. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
The first house rule we're going to talk about today is for better criticals, because nothing feels worse than landing a critical hit and rolling snake eyes on the damage dice.
This house rule actually comes to us from 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and for many iterations of the playtest of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, while it was next, it was the rule for critical hits. So much so that when the rules actually came out, we were surprised that it changed.
It took us a solid year before we realized that we were actually playing with the incorrect rules for critical rolls.
Having now played for several years both with and without using this rule, I think Kelly and I are both in agreement that playing with this makes critical hits into the bone-crunching, damage-dealing powerhouses that they absolutely should be. How does the rule work, Kelly?
The rule's quite simple. When you score a critical hit, roll for damage normally, then determine the maximum damage you can roll with your attack before applying any modifiers. Combine the maximum result with your rolled damage, and then add any modifiers. This is your critical hit damage.
So, as an example, if you're a fighter with a 16 strength score attacking with a longsword and you score a critical hit, to calculate your critical hit damage, you would take the damage die of the longsword, which is D8, maximized. So that's 8 points of damage. Then you roll the D8 and add the result, and then add your strength modifier or any other magical or damage modifiers that you would add to the roll. The important thing is that the modifiers are only added once to the maximum plus the roll, and that gets your total damage.
It's a pretty simple house rule, but it really means that your critical hits are going to matter. Because we have found that in the rules as written in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, critical hits do have a small chance of being pretty meager attacks.
Yeah, it's totally possible for that same fighter to score a critical hit and end up rolling snake eyes, and they've got a 5 damage critical hit, which doesn't feel very satisfying to us. So on the flip side, with this house rule, the minimum damage that critical hit could deal would be 12 points of damage, which is more than the fighter could do otherwise in any circumstance.
Which seems appropriate for rolling that natural 20.
Yeah. Now that said, this rule does make paladins and rogues and other classes that have the ability to apply a whole bunch of damage dice to their critical hits into super monstrous damage dealers when they score critical hits. I think in the case of these classes, though, it works out pretty well.
And, I mean, nothing feels better than a rogue landing a sneak attack critical and one-shotting an enemy.
Yeah.
It feels good for the player, and I think that it's just appropriate to allow that at your table.
Yeah, you may want to rule that with this rule, extra damage isn't multiplied, or that it is always rolled and it isn't automatically maximized if you feel that the numbers get too big. But having played this rule with a campaign that had high-level rogues and high-level paladins, it worked out well for us, and of course it goes the other way around, so it means that monsters' critical hits against the players are pretty nasty as well.
The next rule that we're looking at is for better healing potions, because like the critical hit rules, potions can have a tendency to be pretty meager with the amount of hit points that you regain.
Yeah, you might down a healing potion on the front lines of battle, and what it restores is not enough to save you from the next attack coming in. I feel that potions should be a little bit more worthwhile in this respect, so I've applied a similar rule to the critical hits to my healing potions in my game. Here's how it works. When you would normally roll one or more die to restore hit points with a healing potion, you instead use the maximum result of each die. This is how many hit points the potion restores. So for example, a potion of healing, which normally restores 2d4 plus 2 hit points, under this house rule always restores 10 hit points.
This is an easy way to make sure that a healing potion is easy and dependable. It's less work for the dungeon master, it's less work for the player, and they know that they're going to get a good amount of hit points when they down that healing potion.
Because healing potions are a consumable item, you can balance this house rule by determining how many potions are available to your player characters, and I especially like using this house rule for parties that don't have a dedicated healer, along with a reasonable availability of potions from shopkeepers or vendors throughout the campaign world. So typically I charge 50 gold pieces for a healing potion, 100 gold pieces for a potion of greater healing, or 500 for a potion of superior healing, which restores 40 hit points under this house rule. But whenever my player characters roll into town to buy potions, I roll a d6 to determine how many potions are available for sale. So they can never stock up with hundreds of potions and toss them in their bag of holding and never have to worry about healing again.
The other important thing with this house rule that we're implementing is that if you use the house rule that allows players to drink a potion as a bonus action during combat, this might be a little too powerful if you're using that other house rule.
Yeah, so I would implement one or the other house rule depending on your preference. My personal preference is that I like potions to be a tactical decision, so I want my player characters to have to retreat or use their action to drink them. I'm not a very big fan of potions as a bonus action. I feel it leads to a kind of video gamey style of play where players are chugging back potions while swinging their sword with the other hand.
It's like pausing your game to eat 8 loaves of bread in the middle of a boss battle so that you can regain hit points. This next rule is not so much a house rule as it is an optional rule found on page 251 of the Dungeon Master's Guide that we've modified just a little bit, and that is the rules for flanking.
Flanking has been part of Dungeons & Dragons through 3rd and 4th edition, and the rule was well loved for how it added a tactical element to positioning in combat. The rules for flanking were removed from the Player's Handbook in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but they do appear again in the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 251. And we quite like the flanking rules. We haven't used them in recent campaigns, but I definitely think we're going to start using them again because we do enjoy the tactical element they bring into combat. Here's how they work.
When a creature and at least one of its allies are adjacent to an enemy and on opposite sides of the enemy's space, they flank that enemy, and each of them has advantage on melee attack rolls against that enemy.
When in doubt about whether two creatures flank an enemy using the grid, trace an imaginary line between the centers of the creature's spaces. If the line passes through the opposite sides of the enemy's space, the enemy's flanked. You can also use your best judgment in Theater of the Mind play to determine when flanking applies.
A creature can't flank an enemy that it can't see. It also can't flank while it is incapacitated. A larger creature is flanking as long as one part of its space qualifies for flanking.
So one of the common criticisms of this implementation of the flanking rule in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is that granting advantage on melee attack rolls based on clever positioning is quite generous. So one easy way to modify the flanking rule is to reduce it from advantage to simply a +2 bonus on attack rolls. This is consistent with how flanking was implemented in 3rd and 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons.
This makes the flanking rule similar to how cover works in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Cover granting a bonus to your AC depending on how much cover you have. This one grants a bonus to attack rolls based on your positioning in combat.
I like the interplay between combat and flanking and how that influences the gameplay of ranged and melee combatants. Ranged characters have to deal with cover and concealment. Melee combatants have to deal with the risks of getting outflanked. Both of these rules operating as a +2 bonus, or in the case of 3/4 cover, a +5 bonus to a creature's armor class, are pretty easy to remember and implement in play. So it actually makes me surprised that flanking wasn't included as a core rule, especially considering the way cover was implemented in the 5th edition rules. To me, the idea that adding one small little bonus makes the rules too mathematically complex is a little bit of an oversimplified argument, because the rules of 5th edition D&D are still filled with tons of examples of little +1, +2, or other type bonuses to attack rolls, saving throws, and ability checks. So why there wasn't one for flanking really kind of mystifies me.
It could be interesting as well if you wanted to homebrew this even further. If you look at cover having the option of a +2 or +5, depending on how much cover you have, you could say that if 2 characters are flanking a creature, they gain +2. If 3 characters are flanking a creature, maybe they gain +5.
That would be an interesting way to make getting surrounded by multiple enemies super dangerous. And I think that by using the flanking as a +2 bonus, it allows other creatures that have abilities like Pack Tactics to still have a meaningful benefit from those powers.
The next rule we're looking at is one that Monty and I have both carried over from 4th edition that we both just love to use, and that is the Bloodied Condition.
The Bloodied Condition is a fantastic descriptive tool, but one that can also have a little bit of rule significance depending on how much homebrew you want to add to the experience. It's a very simple rule to remember.
A character is bloodied when the character's hit points are equal to or less than 1/2 the character's maximum hit points, rounded down. 1/2 the character's maximum hit points rounded down is referred to as the character's bloodied value.
For example, a character that has 50 hit points has a bloodied value of 25, and that character is considered bloodied whenever their hit points are below 25.
This is a pretty simple rule to implement, and it can be used for a lot of really interesting things. But honestly, my favorite thing that it's used for is just description to the characters to know that they're making progress in battle. As a player, I really enjoy hearing the DM announce, the creature is now bloodied. It lets me know that I can continue to fight, even if I'm wearing thin on abilities or hit points, because maybe I can push a little further to slay this monster. Also, in the game of Dungeons & Dragons, which exists mostly within our imagination, it really helps to have a visual aid to tell you, oh, the monster's looking hurt. It's looking injured, and we can just push through and kill it.
Using the Bloodied Condition is a great way to trigger a descriptive moment because the attack or spell or whatever caused that character to become bloodied can now be described as a connecting blow that wounds the creature in some way. The greatsword that crashes down against the creature's chest, or the maul that hits them in the side of the face, or the spell that leaves them burned across their body. They're now visibly wounded in some way, and the fight is now getting serious.
Another great way to even enhance the Bloodied Condition even further is to say that creatures that have rechargeable abilities automatically recharge them when they become bloodied.
Another way to expand this rule would be to homebrew feats, spells, class abilities, or even monster powers that only work or can only be used when a creature is bloodied, or can only be used against a creature that is bloodied. There's a lot of creative ideas that you can find in the pages of the 4th edition monster manuals if you're looking for inspiration. I think that this is a great rule, and I'm surprised that the mechanics of the game don't use it more, because you can see in the monster manual there's a few creatures that had the vestigial traces of an ability that was meant to get powered up when they were bloodied. And I would love it if the rules expanded on this some more, because it's a really wonderful condition and a really cool gameplay mechanic that is really underutilized in 5e.
It's also just terrifying to imagine that dragons will get their breath weapons back when they get bloodied.
In play, I also like to use glass beads to mark characters that are bloodied. So I love the visual of looking down across all the miniatures and seeing all these bloodied tokens and seeing the blood flowing on the battlefield.
And finally, another rule that we love to carry over from 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons is the Minion rule, which is great for all of your cannon fodder monsters, because there is nothing harder for a DM than having a table full of 100 little monsters that you have to keep track of, each and every one of them.
The Minion rule was one of my favorite monster building rules for Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, and I was really disappointed that it didn't make its way into 5th edition, and so I have modded a plethora of creatures to minionize them so I can use them in my combat encounters, because straight up, I'm not interested in tracking hit points for more than 4 or 5 monsters. I find that really bogs play down for myself, and I often lose track of how many hit points monsters have. So knowing that I can put a bunch of monsters on the board that only have 1 hit point is really, really easy for me to use in play. And that's the essence of the Minion rule. Here's how it works.
Minion creatures only have 1 hit point. A missed attack never damages a minion, and when a minion is subjected to an effect that allows it to make a saving throw to take only half damage, it instead takes no damage if it succeeds on the saving throw. Minions always deal average damage and never have legendary or lair actions.
Minion monsters can be matched up against the player characters 4-1. We've made a handy chart using the rules from Xanathar's Guide to Everything and the various encounter building rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide that shows you the approximate challenge rating of minions that are appropriate for player characters of varying levels. The minion rule is really easy to apply to any monster. You just find a monster of the appropriate challenge rating and give them only 1 hit point and this minion rule in their stat block. When you're choosing a monster to minionize, you want to avoid choosing a monster that has the multi-attack trait, the spellcasting abilities, or any other really complex powers or abilities. You want to choose simple monsters for your minions. That's why they never have legendary or lair actions either. A legendary minion is a strange idea. By using swarms of simple creatures that only have a single hit point, there's far less for you to track as a DM. They use average damage, so you can roll their damage in groups. You can just pick up a fistful of d20s and roll 4 attack rolls all at once.
In my opinion, this rule, out of all the ones that we're mentioning today, I almost deem essential if you are doing large-scale combat encounters. I have run so many combat encounters that I want to feel like they're up against an army. But when they are up against an army, especially at higher levels, let's say that the party is going up against an army of cultists, but they're now high enough level that cultists would probably die in 1 or 2 hits anyway. Minionizing them means that me as a DM just has so much less to worry about, and I can focus on the key monsters that they are facing to really drive home how intense those creatures are without having to do all this scribbling on my paper as they hit each individual creature around the board.
This is important because there are monsters that are appropriate for minions that are really annoying in the number of hit points they have. For example, the basic bandit or cultist has 11 hit points, which means that there's a good chance that a longsword attack won't kill them in 1 hit. There's a bunch of monsters that are challenge rating 1 and 2 that would be great to use in droves against player characters, but they have 30 or 40 hit points, which means that even if they fail their saving throw against a fireball, they don't die to it. The minion rule means that you can use these creatures, make them pose a rather significant threat to the party, but you don't have to worry about the bookkeeping of exactly how many hit points they have, especially when you're using them in groups of 6, 7, 8, or more.
And at the end of the day, I would rather focus on role-playing and making the game exciting than all the bookkeeping that I have to do with a table full of 100 monsters.
And indeed, adding minions to a combat encounter is a great way to make it a bigger threat as well. Oftentimes the players need to be outnumbered just a little bit by the monsters in order to not walk all over anything. Time and time again, players destroy single monster encounters, but by just adding 5, 6, or 10 minions to the battle, you can really change the circumstances of it.
You may notice that a lot of the rules we've talked about today are borrowed from 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and for all its flaws, these are among some of the gems that we found there.
I enjoyed playing 4e D&D, but I really love 5th edition, and these are just a few of those small tweaks that bring the tactical combat elements that I really loved about 4th edition into the narrative framework that makes 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons shine so brightly. I love using these at my game table. I will say that they've gone through the ringer as far as house rules go, and these are ones that you can really confidently implement during your game because they're in widespread use at many tables and they work for many other players and dungeon masters. And I think that that's the best thing about a good house rule, is it's one that enhances the game, that really has that stamp of approval, that battle-tested reputation to be used in many tables. Enjoy them.
So this has been a look at 5 simple house rules for better combat in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you've used any of these or have others that you love, tell us about them in the comments below.
If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting our work on Patreon. You can find out how you can help the channel by following the links in the description below.
Don't forget to check out our live play Dungeons of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got more on house rules and homebrewing for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.